Hi, my name is Reid Moores. In 2014, I experienced what most people would call a near-death experience. And when I experienced that situation back in 2014, specifically January 10th, it was the most incredible feeling. So what happened to me, I never thought it would happen the way it happened because I know that there was something beyond the veil, but I never thought it would come to me as in that fast flash. I had a lot of understanding about death before that happened to me because I grew up in Haiti and it's a violent country. So I've seen death, I've known death. Death was all around all the time. And it wasn't nothing that would surprise me about death. But for it to happen to me, that was the most unusual and the most unique thing. So here's my story. In 2014, I had my fiance and it was good life. So everything was okay. She lived in her apartment and I lived in mine. And I remember that day we went out. It was fun. We had a good time. So I dropped her off and I went back home, my apartment. Around 11 o'clock, I went to bed. Everything was normal. Everything was as usual. I talked to her a little bit before I went to bed. So I went to bed. And what would happen is that around early morning, I was feeling like in a tunnel, which would feel like a sleep, like a dream. But then I realized it was not a dream. It was very well that I was in that tunnel with all of these people. And what would happen is that we were all in that van, that Westphalia type of van, because I know about cars too. So as we're going into the tunnel, really dark, I realized, hey, I had a feeling I know where we are because I'm the type that used to make some research about death and all of that, but I never thought that I would find myself in that tunnel, which were like, okay, only if you die you can get in that tunnel. But I was in it with all these people going further and further and deeper and deeper. And at the end there's this, exit and that kind of brightness and light, how would you call it? Because I would feel that, all these people that say they died, I guess they were right. So that's how I would feel in myself. And I would say to myself, so I was like, could I be dead? So that's when, as I was going deeper and to reach that exit, to that end of the tunnel, and the most unusual thing happened. I heard my mom's voice. And my mom, which lives in Florida, she said, oh no, we are dead. And at the moment my mom said that, my body that was laying on the bed as I was laying there sleeping just shut down. Completely shut down, like dead. And I knew that because I knew I was dead. And that's when, as I was out of that body and my mom said that we are dead, I stood and I just looked around. I didn't look at my body because it was so interesting and so vivid and so real that I'm out of body dead and I'm standing in front of my closet. But when I looked to check on my body, I felt like I didn't want to see it. And then I turned and I kept on looking in my closet. That's when I realized, wow, look at all these things I have. Look at all these clothes, this jewelry, money, whatever I had there. And I felt this deep sadness because none of that could take me back to life, because I know that that's why everybody fighting for, but none of that were necessary and useful. And I felt like, wow, that's pretty intense. That material stuff don't bring nothing more than material peace, but the spiritual peace is not in material stuff. So then I realized it's not where the peace is. So I just went out the room because my apartment was not that big, but it was kind of nice, good size. So I just went out the bedroom, turned to the right to the living room. That's where I had my library, and I approached. So what I saw was my books there on my shelves. And I picked up one. I wonder how I did that. And I felt some deep sadness that I lost all that knowledge, all this knowledge and all these books that I had the time to open them to read at least one page. So I really felt very sad. And that just wow, that's pretty interesting that I was feeling that sadness regarding the books, but regarding the other stuff I had, it was none of that. So I really okay, interesting. But I wasn't scared. And then what happened, it was interesting after, because as I was there, all of this was taking me aback, because I just how can I be dead in this apartment by myself? So at the same time, I felt happy, but I was very doubtful too. And in an instant, I saw myself where there was this big stage, like a stage where you would perform any type of, bands would stay on and then perform. So I was there standing, and then I could see Earth very, very from afar as I was standing there. And the voice that I heard behind on the back said, you need to bow down to say your goodbyes to Earth. And I was like, bow down to say my goodbyes? What do you mean? And the voice says, the earth is nothing but a play. You were an actor. And that's why I thought, oh, that's interesting. The earth is a play. So as the voice was telling me to bow down, and there were these curtains that started to pull together to close, like when a show ends. So when the curtain, was pulling to be closed, I said, so I would have any contacts with earth, none of that, no news, no good news, no bad news, nobody I knew. So all these things that I experienced, so what's it all about? Says the earth was just a play. So as I was discussing what's all that about, and then the curtain closed and the voice said bow down. So I just, bow down like a comedian on the stage. And at the same instant, we were like traveling. But the travel in that realm is not something that people would take as you would fly. You just feel you're there because it's so vast and magnificent that you would just, be. It's a state of being. So I was there in the realm of death where I would feel this intense love, this joy, this pure energy. I didn't see nobody actually of myself, but I felt I was there. And I was there actually. So as we were there, I would get some notions of life and all that there is about some principles of life, about, the human conditions and nature, about some hate, some love. But that was so unusual because what happened is that I had this worry, even though I was in this realm where I was floating or navigating or, I don't know, bathing, and it felt as if I was like huge and I could hold everything in my hand, the universe, the earth, everything was so powerful. And I didn't have any fear, I didn't have any worries, but I could sense that I was having something that was holding me back. But yet I still was feeling like, well, you know what, if I'm dead, definitely my people, they're gonna be worried too, and I'm sure that I could come to tell them that I'm okay. And it's like I felt like I could play with death even. So I was like, wow, maybe I can come back to spook him out or something like that, because there was no scare, there was nothing to worry about. And I felt that state. And I even say, well, I could even go to my funeral and let him know that I'm okay by some sign, like, that I know I'm not dead and I'm there, just they cannot see me. And I would feel all these emotions that what would happen if ever they discuss me, they discover my body in that room on that bed, laying there lifeless. And specifically, I was thinking about my fiance. But I didn't really worry because I knew I was in good hands, and I felt the intense love, and my senses were enhanced and heightened, and we were like in that good energy type of realm. So it was so magnificent that it's even undescribable, because one have to see it to know it or experience it. And where the climax would take place is that in one instant, because in that realm everything happens in a snap. And I saw myself in that big type of valley as I was going, walking, seeing, checking things out. Like, it's a nice area, very beautiful, calm and quiet. And it felt like I hear as music coming from somewhere. And then I kept on walking and walking. And as I approached a little closer to hear the noise, the voice, the music, that's where I realized this magnificent gate. It was so huge and beautiful. I was standing in awe. I was like, wow, this is interesting to just look at, because I never seen anything like it. It was so huge and gigantic, and it reached the heavens. And I could not even see the top, so much it was big. I would have to probably lay on the floor, on the ground to look, but even then it was so tall. And as I was standing there admiring the scenery, the gate, the ornaments, the way it works, and the music were playing so mellow and so relaxing and calm, and I felt like I had this deep worry. But then why am I worried? Okay, then everything was fine for a moment. That's when I realized, well, if ever somebody come out of this gate, I'm gonna have to ask all the life questions about the Jesus situation, about all the stuff that the world has gone through, and then what are the truth behind it, because life it's not about survival, it's about truth. So that's when I stood in front of the gate waiting to be greeted by any who, but mostly since my interactions and people I got out in my family from Christian religion, I would tend more to be greeted by Jesus, not to be like, oh, well, finally I'm with Jesus, but to ask questions. So I stood there waiting felt like it was a long time and I waited, but yet it wasn't tiring because it was so magnificent. I enjoyed the view so much, and I was like, wow, that's the place to be. And the music was there, and then I was standing there too. And at some point, I felt like I had a pinch in my heart where something was bothering me, and I was wondering what was bothering me. So I was searching like in myself to know if I really want to go there or not. So I was like, okay, should I stay? Should I go? Should I stay? Should I go? So then I realized a bubble light moment. Wait a minute, I cannot go behind that gate, because I knew in myself as if I came from there, but if I ever go back behind this gate, I'm not coming back. And this would be the end, the final end. And as in the moment I thought of that, I felt like, no, I cannot go for many reasons. I don't think I can do it. Not that I don't want to, but I can't, because first of all, what I would say, I thought about Jess, my fiance. She would call me as we would do every morning. She'd call me or I would call her, like, she would expect me to sometime all the time. And she would call me, she would not find me, and she would come by, turn it on, to open the apartment, or turning the keys in, and then found me in the bed. And as if I was bleeding for that not to happen, I was like, no, that's not a sight for her to see. And not only that, I have my parents, I have my life, these things I was told before that how my life would be. So I don't think all that would be lies, because prior to that, people would tell me things that come to pass at the end of my life. But when that happened, I was like, no, it cannot be, because this is not the way it's supposed. Why should I die now? And if I cross, I know it's the end, but I cannot accept that. I'm not pleased with that decision, because the reputation, people would think I was on drugs, I overdosed, or any kind of things, I got shot, or anything would be like a cause for my death, since they would not know. And as I was standing there pleading my case, that's when I felt like I was pushed, but like I was very high, and I fell back in my body, and as if it was like a loud silence. And I use that expression because that's how it felt, a loud silence. And I fell back, and as soon as I fell back in my body and I gasped for air and I woke up, I opened my eyes and I said, no, it can't be. But why I say that is because of the intense love emanation that's there in that realm, where you would feel no fear, you would feel great, you would feel secure, you would feel happiness and joyful, happy and joyful, and all these emotions. You can see without seeing, you can hear without hearing. And with the time dilatation, it's like you've never been there, but at the same time, you've been there. So it was such a great and powerful thing that I tried to go back to sleep again, or try to die again, in a sense where I would pat my head on the pillow to say, no. So I wanted to go back. And I was like, why would you want to go back? Not because I wanted to die, but because of all this great love and energy, positive energy that was surrounding me, that made me feel I was so safe and secure that I wanted to be there. But then I realized, hey, you cannot do that. It's the realm of death, and now you're back to life. Consider that what that could have been, because if ever you cross that gate, that would have been the end. And now you're back, you had the experience, you should consider that as the greatest experience of your life. And as I was thinking about it like that and pounding on it while I was sitting on the bed, and I said, I look, and he was check on the phone, it was 5:30 in the morning around. And so I called my friend and I said, you know what, let me see who can I call, because I didn't want to keep that to myself, and as soon as I realized there's only one person I could call, it's a friend of mine that lived up in Florida, and I knew she worked night shift. So as soon as I realized, well, she could be home by then, I said, let me call her. And I called her and she picked up, and she was like, why you call me so early? What's going on? I said, hey, guess what, sis? I just died and I just came back. And then she was like, what? I said, yes, I just died and I just came back. It was the most unusual and unique of experience. So I explained to her what happened to me with awe. She listened to me for a good 45 minutes. We discussed the situation. And after that, I hung up with her. We hung up and she went to bed. So by 6 something now, I finally stood up, got up from the bed and get out of the room. Actually, before I got out of the room, I looked around and felt like, wow, what an experience I had, as if I changed where all this I had mean nothing to me now. It's like cars, money, clothes, jewelry, this, that. I feel I disregarded all of them in the same moment. It was so worthless and not necessary that I value my library more than everything. And I went rushing outside to the living room where I was checking my library, and I was feeling so sad and very emotional. So I went and I just embraced my library, just checking on a few pages, and felt like I wanted to hug it, but I know I could not, but I cherish it. And I looked at it and I felt like that's knowledge that a lot of people don't have. That's why we got a lot of people that are led astray because they don't know. So as I was feeling all these emotions after I came back, and I transformed for the better, in a sense where now it's not now, but it has been not about material gain, material profits. It's all about love and care and compassion and relationship, good relationships. And, you take care of the other one, because the God situation is the other one that is God. When we look at the other person, you look at God. So that's why we got all this frustration in the world. So one person says this, one person says that, and they cannot come to an agreement. But in that realm of death, there is no such thing as religion or hate or fear. Everybody comes together. That's what I experienced. And there was no somebody's better than the other, as I was there myself, and I could not trust that I was in that realm, because it was so profound that it changed me ever since. Now that I'm talking to you, that this experience is the most unique one I had, that not that I hate it, but I kept to myself for the last 10 years. And finally I decided to put it in a book, which shared other stories of near-death experiences. As I realized there are 1,000 ways to die. I say 1,000, but it's just a metaphor, but there are many, many more ways to die. And that's why, as I grew up in a couple state borders of religion, because thanks to my parents, they were all very open-minded, so I had to experience a lot of, religion and sex, because you can find truth in all of it. So it's all about the balance. And as I was searching, I know that when you sleep, you die, and when you die, you sleep. And that's how death is. So every time we blink, we die, because we don't know if we're going to open it back. It might be the last time we blink. That's why I like when Jesus said, the person they say they call Jesus, when the girl was dead, and he said, well, she's not dead, she's sleeping. So that's the way to put death. And death is that experience that transformed me, and I'm really thankful for it. And I'm not scared of it. I'm not mad at it. Actually, I welcome the experience. And I think that's something I really wanted to share. And I appreciate that you gave me the voice to, and the platform to tell my story.
My name's Tina. I have lived a life of extreme trauma from age 0. So when I was 22, sexual, emotional, physical trauma. So by the time I was 22, I, was drinking and doing drugs a lot, mostly to turn off the psychic radio, which I didn't realize at the time was really what was driving my drug addiction, and also to deal with, the trauma of life. Living with my one and only boyfriend, the one and only time I've ever lived with a boyfriend in Boston in 1992, and I got pregnant, and I didn't even know I was pregnant until it was too late. And at the hospital, SF General, I didn't have insurance or anything, so I knew I needed to get an abortion, and they thought I was 15 weeks along, so I was too late for a regular abortion, so they had to give me an induced miscarriage. So they tried to do that in the operating room. It didn't work. They had to actually go in surgery to have the abortion. But when they were doing the ultrasound in between, because they didn't understand why the induced miscarriage wasn't working, they discovered I was actually pregnant with twins, and I was only 9 weeks pregnant. So that's why it didn't work. But as I was under the anesthetic, right before I went over, I remember the doctor was saying, you got to stop doing this to yourself, as if I was the only one involved in getting pregnant. And I was really angry. I was very angry most of my life. Everything, dealing patriarchal society. And I remember going under, and I was so anemic at the time. I was always passing out on the street. I didn't realize that, when you get pregnant, your blood sugar often goes wackadoo. So I basically bled out on the operating table. Pretty quickly, I just slipped right out of my body and I was floating above the operating table. I could see everybody freaking out. I could sense that everybody was really annoyed with the fact that they had to give me an abortion and that I was like non-funded for this operation. They were all really kind of pissed off about it. And I just didn't care. I was so angry. I was like, whatever, I just want to go. And so I just turned around and I floated up and I saw this tunnel and I was met by this really beautiful androgynous being that was blue, whose voice sounded like an oak tree and describe it. And basically they just said, you can go now if you want. And it was just so beautiful and so loving there. I was kind of ironic that dying was the most beautiful experience of my life up until that point. But I was tempted to just go, young age of 22, because I felt so done with the world. And they said if I chose to go back, that there was a lot of work I needed to do and that my existence would be helpful to the world if I did go back, that I needed to go back. And if I did go back, I needed to commit. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll go back, And going back into my body felt like kind of like when you're in a bathtub and you're floating in the water and it feels really good, and then the water leaves and everything becomes really heavy, like concrete. Felt like I was living in concrete. Everything hurt. And I ended up spending 3 days in the hospital recovering. My boyfriend at the time never even showed up, which was a little bit painful in itself. I found out as soon as I left the hospital and finally did go back to our apartment, he never came to pick me up. So I just had to lie and say that he was there to pick me up. And I just walked back to the apartment. And as soon as I walked in, apparently he had just cheated on me. And I was so angry and so over it and so determined now that I had been told by this blue being that I had work to do and I had to get on my path, basically, that I just was like, call this. And I just moved out of that apartment within a week and got a ticket to California. Decided I was going to get on the train, go to California and be a comic book artist. That's what I really wanted to do. And so I did. And to San Francisco, and for the next 30 years I was living there, comic books. But the thing about having crossed over, so to speak, is that now a friend of mine actually said, oh, you're a version 2.0, meaning, you've gone and come back, good way of putting it, because now the channel was open and I started to be able to see ghosts and energies and being able to perceive time stuff. I was still kind of smoking weed and doing all that stuff for years. I didn't get clean until 5 years ago, and that's when the psychic radio went full blast. After 2012, I had my whole life just fell apart. I had another relationship that also ended up being very abusive, and I was just done. I can't have a relationship that isn't like this. Then I'm just not going to have relationships anymore. And I decided to embrace the hopelessness, as the Buddhists say, by just accepting who I was and not trying to make something happen that just wasn't happening. And so I basically went this again, and I just moved out of my apartment. I bought this box truck, and I just drove in a 13,000 mile circle around America for the last 8 or 9 years. I guess it's been, watching the fire, sitting in the woods, looking at fires, and really kind of doing a lot of the shadow work that I had so needed to do in order to get over all of my trauma from the past and to really learn how to love myself. Midst of that, I found a dog on the street. Her name is Sadie. And when I first found her, my heart was like on fire. What is this strange feeling in my heart? It's like awesome, but it hurts. And I was like, oh, this must be love. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, I'm 45 years old. And this is the first time I've ever felt actual love for another living thing. I felt it for my pianos and my bicycles and things, but never really people. I couldn't trust them enough to have that kind of feeling towards them. And so my standards went whoop. And I basically, after that, I was like, if anyone doesn't make me feel this way, the way my dog makes me feel, then I don't need to be around them. And it was a good way to set a boundary for myself on what kinds of situations and people I should get myself involved in from that point on. And it really made a huge difference. It also taught me how to stay with myself instead of abandoning myself in so many situations. Because when you're growing up in trauma and a lot of times you're dissociating and leaving your body, I think the plus side of that is that it makes it a lot easier in meditation to pull away from whatever you're going through and to be able to see things from an observer point of view, because you've spent most of your life observing from back in your head as someone else. And in that sense, it made it a lot easier to see the bigger picture of things. And then I decided to start taking classes at shaman school online while the pandemic was happening. And we did a lot of past life regression, stuff like that, and talked a lot about soul retrieval. And it didn't occur to me until after I'd already gone in this giant circle around America that I ended up driving back to every house we had lived in growing up, because we were in the military, so we were always moving. I ended up going back to every house I lived in and picking up the kid part of myself that was left there, who had gone through what he had gone through in those places. And I felt more whole than I'd ever felt before, and more like in the driver's seat of my own life. Instead of just reacting to things and feeling like a victim constantly, I really felt like I had the ability to protect myself, not with stigmatized, negative judgments from others, because a lot of times I think I was trying to protect myself by being the drug addict or by being the weirdo so that people would stay away from me. And it kind of shifted, my polarity sort of shifted, and I began to understand how to protect myself, trust, passion, self-compassion. And so after I had done all the soul retrieval and started picking up all my former parts, a lot of the anger that I had felt towards my parents started to shift, because I could now see how so many of the things that were done to me as a child were also done to them as children, though they would never admit it in person. In fact, they ended up disowning me when I got sober because I started asking all these questions to try and put together the pieces of the ancestral trauma and figure out how far back it went, and they just denied everything and said, "You're crazy, or get away from us, don't ever talk to us again." And I was like, that's cool, that's really what I wanted, was to go into contact with my parents. And I didn't know how to do that in a way that wasn't going to be aggressive and yelling at each other and stuff. So it actually worked out really well. They admitted, we're much happier without you in our life, because, scapegoat, you represent everything negative to them and that they don't want to face. And so them ejecting me from their life was the best gift. Changed my name. I moved away from where I was again in my truck, and now they don't know where I am. And it's like liberation is, it's sometimes gets slowly, but it's totally worth it. It's been great. I've been learning how to cope drug-free, and a lot of it has been about the psychic woo-woo stuff, is really what's been pulling me through more than anything else. Because when I learned all the past life traumas that I had been through, like burning at the stake as a witch, or, whenever I was living a life where I wanted to try and heal people, they would then turn on me and the betrayal would happen and then I would be killed for it. Seeing how that was the pattern in my life up until then, it kind of made me really resonate with the theory that most of us in life that are coming into some severe darkness when we're younger, and having drug addiction issues and things like that, that we are the shamans of our generation. This is a 100,000-year-old practice, and I always thought that the stuff I was doing out in the woods and talking in the trees was just because I was crazy and weird. But in fact, these were all like actual techniques that go way back, and that most of us that feel dejected from society are in fact the people that can see with both eyes, because we've been on both sides of the fence, as it were. So at one point when I was driving around the country doing my inadvertent soul retrieval, I was standing on I was doing a little ritual in the river across the bank. There's a river in upstate New York called the Mohawk River. And when I was a kid, when I was 10, I used to play on this one side of the river all the time. And out of the side of my eye, I would always see somebody standing on the other side of the river. And I just thought it was like a ghost or something. But whatever it was really comforting. And I used to love to kind of see it. Tell me everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. Get through this time and you'll be all right. And then when I was back there, 30 years later, doing this ritual, I realized I was standing in the exact place where I had always seen the ghost that was telling me everything was going to be all right. And then I realized that my guide was myself from the future. It was like this weird quantum erasure of time, like time just didn't exist. Or that later, when I got into Reiki and everything, I realized it was extremely important now for me to go and send all that energy back into my past to complete the loop. And not only to myself, but also to the previous 7 or so generations of women that had been abused. Whether or not they choose to accept it, I don't know, but it felt really good to close that karmic cycle because I no longer am rotating in the same abusive patterns. And it's easier for me to pop out from those experiences when they are happening. And in that sense, it also makes it easier for me to help people cross over when I do find ghosts in my environment. The last house I lived in San Francisco was super haunted. So haunted. It was like a house from 1853, and there were just a lot of people stuck there. Lots of death and betrayal. And I would always see this one guy dressed in like 1920s clothing. And during the 15 years or so that I lived there, there were at least 7 or 8 other roommates who would move in, and then eventually they'd get really depressed. And as soon as they moved out, they were fine because his energy was so oppressive. And finally, I decided, because there were so many people in that building, I was just going to do a giant releasing ritual for everybody that was in there. And it was like a big boat came. They all got on the boat and went. They're all happy to go, except for the one guy. He would not leave. He kept going, pacing back and forth in the hallway. And, I'd have parties and shows at my house, and other people would see him walking around too, and they'd be like, I'd be like, yeah, that's the guy, he's waiting for me. And I was getting angry at him because he wouldn't go. And so I ended up having to read through about 2,500 obituaries. I knew he had died somewhere in between 1921 and 24. So I read through all of the obituaries online in San Francisco during that time. And it was daunting. It was overwhelming. But then I knew as soon as I found his obituary, it was going to make sense. And it did, because as soon as I read his obituary, all the hair on my body just stood up. Apparently, he had lived in the house and was having an affair with a woman in the same place. And she convinced him that her husband was abusive. Her name was Maggie. Maggie convinced John to kill her husband, George, because she's like, he abuses me, and if I kill him, we can go be married. So John stabbed George to death, and then Maggie turned John into the cops, so he was arrested and put in prison. And she never went to see him or anything. She just left him there, and then she went and married somebody else. And John felt so betrayed that he self-imprisoned. He was only like 22 or 23. But when I read that obituary and I knew his level of betrayal resonated so deeply with me, I felt so bad about being an asshole to him, because I was like, okay, I thought I had dealt with betrayal. Dude, this is like beyond. So I had a releasing ritual for him then, and he was fine to go. He just wanted people to know his story and why he felt so betrayed. The takeaway I've gotten from dealing with all these emotions and feeling stuff is that we resonate with whatever we're feeling as well. Like, we're on the same frequency. When the frequency of forgiveness comes through and manages to transmute some of that darkness, and allows people to let go of whatever guilt or self-hatred or anger they're stuck in, it's all about sound. It's all about frequency. And that's why we have to acknowledge our own emotions just as much as we acknowledge those that people around us that are dead or even living. It's really important, I think, to acknowledge everything, and to everyone to have a lot more self-compassion, especially to people who are living with CPTSD, to let go of all those negative thoughts, acknowledge them, and accept that you feel that way, but you don't need to let it ruin your life. It's like a horse. You got to learn how to ride the rage horse. Because when you ride the rage horse and you get on board and you hold the reins, you can gently guide that energy towards pure joy.